Dudes, long time no make a video. I am back, and big news. I have a book coming out next month from Canon Press. I can't wait to share more information about that with you guys. Today, I am going to make a video about Western civilization. Actually, the video is about the burning of ships. The video is about education. More than anything, it's about education. The video is about Andrew Torba and Gab. This video is about Christendom and mere Christendom. So much going on to talk about, but the big focus is going to be Andrew Torba's recent emphases of interest and Christians finding the correct place to fight. So, you can go here to find a couple of different videos I've done on the West. The Christian West. Christendom has existed. Now, I have differed with some Christians who talk about the defense of the West on various fronts, because fundamentally I believe that Christ triumphs. Christ is king. And if it's the destiny of the West to die a beautiful and tragic death, then that's fine. And then our labor as Christians is to make sure that it's beautiful. But whether we die in the citadel, in the keep, the last citadel, the last keep of the West, or whether we're marching out to die in triumphant, conquering battlefields, we must fight for Christendom. And we must fight for the culture we've inherited and the culture we'll pass on. And I am a teacher of Western civilization. I offer 4 classes through Kepler of Old Western culture, which is a Roman Roads curriculum. I love it because basically the curriculum is, these are the old books. Read them and we'll talk about them. It's what I would have done anyway. Education is where this thing, this building of culture, right? Trowel in one hand, spear in the other, building up the walls of the city and then going forth to conquer. All that happens through culture. And what is education but the transmission of culture? I've argued in so many previous videos that education is simply raising your kids. They are one and the same thing. And we think in such paltry ways, both about what raising your kids means and about what education is. Educating your kids, raising your kids, is building up their souls, making them human, which ultimately means that you are showing them how to be Christ-like. Education is where this construction becomes generational, right? Where you and your church aren't just hiding away in a corner hoping for the helicopter of the rapture to come in. You're building something. It's all about education. Andrew Torba has been on this tear in Gab recently, posting about classical Christian education, which has been absolutely fascinating to see. And then he sent out an email, which my company got, and it wasn't at all about education. But there was something in that I want to talk about, because ultimately the point is going to be how education suffuses everything. So here's this email that he sent, and I'm just going to read the beginning to you. It's about leaving secular mainstream media behind, right? And that's what Gab was founded on, right? On that idea that we need to do stuff for ourselves as Christians. And those of you who have been following the channel for a long time know that I have had different degrees of engagement with Gab and with Torba, but the whole reason I was excited at first about Gab was exactly that. I completely agree with that take on things. So he sends this email about new media. And he says, it's time to burn the ships of traditional media. And he tells a story. In 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived in the New World with a mission to conquer the Aztec Empire. He arrived with a small army of 600 men, but he faced a significant challenge. His men were afraid, and they were not sure that they could succeed in their mission. To inspire his men, Cortés did something radical. He burned his ships. By doing so, he eliminated any possibility of retreat and forced his men to fight for victory or death. This act of burning the ships became a symbol of determination and commitment. And then he says, fast forward to today, we face a similar challenge. We're in a battle for the truth, etc. Okay. And I was just struck by the use of that example. It's such a classical example. Why do I say that? Because, the burning of the ships by Cortés is a modern occurrence. Yes, 1519 is the modern age. So why do I say that it's such a classical thing? Well, it exists in the stream of history that became Western Christendom for a while, and ultimately began to fall apart and collapse. But before that was this, well, you guys all know the stories, right? But this religion comes out, the true faith, out of Jerusalem and pours forth into the Greco-Roman world. And these Greco-Roman stories, well, there are stories. This faith is our faith. And it all becomes one story without any muddying, right? Faithful Christians are not tempted to worship Zeus or to be like Achilles, but these are our stories. The stories about ships and burnings, I see constantly because I teach these classes. So when I'm teaching the Greeks, the ships of the Danaans make them weak, right? They're always wanting to go back. And then the biggest fight that they have is when the Trojans press in upon them, and there's that big fight with Ajax, and they burn some of the ships, right? They're motivated to save the ships because they want to go home. They want to go home, and that's the constant thing that weakens them, although ultimately they're brought victory. In the Aeneid, in the second year, I'm teaching the Romans, and in the Aeneid, the safety of the fleet, beset by gods, by storms, and then even as they're going in to fulfill this great mission of conquering Italy, and the fleet is under threat of fire, and parts of it are burned. But goddesses, their own women, their enemies. Alexander burned a fleet like Cortés did, or so it is said. And he said that we're not going back to Greece. We were invading Persia. That was the deal, right? We're not going back to Greece in these ships. Burns them. If we go back, we're going back in Persian ships. Julius Caesar is said to have burnt his fleet when he invaded Great Britain for the same reasons. Now I say is said. We don't know for sure. Even the greatest, the myth of the West, has a story of the burning of the ships, and it's tragic, and I'm going to read it to you. This one I don't cover in any of my classes yet, okay? Because it's neither the Greeks nor the Romans. It is far more profoundly an myth than that. The Silmarillion. This is from the story of the kinslaying. But when they were landed, Maedhros, the eldest of his sons, and on a time the friend of Fingon, ere Morgoth's lies came between them, spoke to Feanor, saying, Now what ships and rowers will you spare to return, and whom shall they bear hither first? Fingon the valiant? Then Feanor laughed as one fey, and he cried, None and none. What I have left behind I count now no loss. Needless baggage on the road it has proved. Let those that cursed my name curse me still, and wind their way back to the cages of the Valar. Let the ships burn. Then Maithros alone stood aside, but Feanor caused fire to be set to the white ships of the Teleri. So in that place, which was called Losgard, the outlet of the Firth of Drengist, ended the fairest vessels that ever sailed the sea, in a great burning, bright and terrible. And Fingolfin and his people saw the light afar off, red beneath the clouds, and they knew that they were betrayed. This was the first fruits of the kinslaying and the doom of Noldor. Unlike Cortez, this burning of the fleet doesn't work out. It does not lead them to go off into triumph. It is, in fact, a very tragic story. But really, all of these stories, like so much of the story of the West, is full of tragedy and complexity and ambiguity, but also with that conquering and crusading spirit. And speaking of crusading, the West has also suffered at the hands of those who would burn their ships for resolution's sake. So in 711, the Moors famously invade Spain, and they land at the Rock of Gibraltar. Not called the Rock of Gibraltar at the time. The Kingdom of the Vandals, which is what Spain was, is invaded by Tariq ibn Ziyad and his small army. And they called this big rock, this big mountain, Jabal Tariq, or Tariq's mountain, and it became Gibraltar. This is purportedly what he said before they faced the overwhelming numbers of the massively divided Goths. And there was a little situation similar to what happened at Hastings, where Roderick the Goth, the Visigoth, had to come all the way down from fighting the Basques, rush down to southern Spain, to Cadiz, and although he vastly outnumbered them, there was a huge journey rushing it over there. They are defeated. Anyway, not to take away from the military prowess of these Berbers, and Tariq says to them as he's burning their ships, he says, "O people, there is nowhere to run away. The sea is behind you, and the enemy is before you. I swear to God, you have only sincerity and patience." It would take a lot of patience to see through that fight. One of the survivors of the Battle of Guadalete flees to the very far north, to Asturias, and it's from there, that same generation, just 7 years later, that the fight to reconquer Spain begins. And such amazing poetry and such amazing liturgy and such amazing letters came from that reconquest. That's the stuff I love. And that again reminds me of my classes, right? In Spanish 3 this year, reading El Cid. So in my Spanish 2 class, we actually read the story that Torba brought up. Chapter 4 of the second part of Easy Spanish Reader, The Astuteness of Cortez. The greater part of the Spanish soldiers were very brave, but, pardon me, some feared the Indians because they were so numerous and the Spanish were so few. Cortez thought that these soldiers wished to return to Cuba. To avoid this, the Spanish captain conceived a brilliant plan. Cortez sunk all the boats but one. Then he said to his soldiers that if there were one who were afraid and wished to return to Cuba, he could return in that boat. The soldiers that were afraid did not wish to confess it, and no one dared to board the boat. Then Cortez sank the last boat that remained, and thus the soldiers had no other option but to conquer Mexico or die, because they could not return to Cuba. Now, I talked about moral ambiguity and complexity, but it is such a suicidal sign of the West that we let those things call into question our own story and the way we educate. Yep. Cortez had left Cuba illegally. Yeah, he had some debts. So there are those who dismiss this as a simple adventure. But if you read the story with attention, If you read the story, yes, with sympathy. If you read the story as an adventurer yourself, understanding the complexities of life, then you see, here was an adventure worthwhile. And this is why we educate. And this is why we tell these stories. So Torba sends out this email about his main mission. His mission that he wants to have us abandon traditional media and start our own things and do our own things and support each other. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he referred, I mean, obviously he was trying to make a point, right? There's no going back. We're burning our ships. We're burning our bridges. Okay? The die is cast, for another Julius Caesar reference. But education and the stories that we pass on to each other about the West, okay, rooted in the far more fundamental thing of the story of the people of God. But those stories are the things that could make the West perdure. Those are the things that could make the West last. That was hard to say because I insisted on using the word perdure because I'm that kind of snob. God is in charge of all history. The most important thing, and the most important thing you can educate your child in, is in the proclamation of the gospel. We need to understand that that gospel exists in a context for all of us. And many stories have lived and have died. Many stories have vanished. But the fact is that Homer and Tolkien and Virgil and Augustine and the chroniclers of Cortez and Winston Churchill, George Washington, they are a part of your story and a part of the story of how God got you and your family to where you are. Anyway, I'm just talking about this and I'm getting more and more excited about my classes. So you can find links to all of them below if you've got any high school age kids. I'm doing Spanish 1 and 2, no Spanish 3 this year, alas, and then 4 years of old Western culture. If you have any questions about that stuff, send me an email, find me online, whatever, just drop a comment. I hope you guys have appreciated this. I'll be interested to see what happens with all of this rising interest from so many people on the richness of a classical Christian education to raise your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord without telling them about Narnia, about Middle-earth, about Odin and Thor and Asgard, about the Anglo-Saxons, without telling them about the burning ships of Troy, without telling them about the Spanish Reconquest, without telling them both how Roland bravely fought off the Islamic invaders on the border between France and Spain, and how Roland likely actually died fighting Gascon bandits in some little ravine. It's all a part of the story, and it is a part, believe this, of our gospel. It is an outworking, and it is fertilizer for our gospel building. Peace of Christ be upon you.
What day is it today? Remind me.
It's Sunday, Mr. Pension.
Sunday. And what do we do on a Sunday morning, wherever we happen to be? We go to church, you bloody heathen!